Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, so we're picking up where we left off. This is Surat Al-Takathur. Al-Takathur is a Meccan surah consisting of 8 verses, 119 letters, and 28 words. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Allah says, Alhaakumut Takathur. So here, the translation of this verse can be the competition for more distracted you. The competition for more. Here we're talking about boasting and vying with one another for more wealth and children. And this is what has distracted you, meaning it's preoccupied you from obeying Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that basically, Alhaakumu at-Takathur, that all are preoccupied, all of you are preoccupied by love of this world, its delights and its adornments. Right? We understand that these things are considered min zina hayatid dunya. Okay? The wealth, the spouse, the offspring, the home, those things are all adornments of this life that can, and here we see, preoccupy one from the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, distracting you from seeking the hereafter and desiring it. Okay, you can become distracted from that, especially if you have gained this life by destroying your hereafter. If you have gained this life, gained this world and all of its adornments and pleasures and delights while destroying your hereafter, then why would you seek the hereafter? What interest do you have in the hereafter? What desire do you have for it when you know, at least in the back of your mind or in your heart, that, look, I've ruined my hereafter because I've run after, in a very ravenous manner, I've run after this world, and I've sacrificed so much by disobeying Allah in the process. Imam Ahmad recorded from one of the great companions. He said, the companion said, I came to the Prophet ﷺ while he was saying, Alhaakumut Takathur, reciting this verse, يقول ابن آدم مالي مالي وهل لك من مالك إلا ما أكلت فأفنيت أو لبست فأبليت أو تصدقت فأمضيت. He says the Prophet ﷺ was reciting this verse, the mutual increase, or we could say the competition for more has distracted you or diverted you. Then he said, the son of Adam says, my wealth, my wealth. Mali, mali, my wealth, my wealth. He says, but do you get anything of benefit from your wealth except for that which you have consumed and exhausted or finished it, or that which you have clothed yourself with and then you wear it out, or that which you gave in charity, and this is an exception, and you have spent it forward. فَأَمْضَيْتْ, meaning you've put it forward. So this is a narration which the Prophet ﷺ has been reported to have said relating to this verse, describing the nature of how the son of Adam, mankind, deals with, or the perspective that we can have regarding wealth. Muslim, Imam At-Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i, they also recorded this particular hadith. The next verse, Allah says, حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرِ, which means until you visit the graves. Until you visit the graves, you counted the graves, meaning of your deceased. As a group of people, you boasted, counting the living members and the wealth that you had, and then you visited the graves to count the dead out of pride. And as a result, this verse was revealed, and of course it is a statement of rebuke. Hatta zurtumul maqabir, meaning they counted the wealth in this life and then they counted the number of deceased in the graveyard. So this is like a form of rebuke and admonishment. Until you visited the graves, meaning until you died and were buried in those graves. So they were boasting and bragging about Takathur, which is an increase, not only of the things that they held on to this world, but also the people that were lying dead in their graveyard until, of course, they were buried themselves. The next verse reads, كَلَّا سَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ, which means no, you are going to know. No, you are going to know, meaning come into knowledge of it. Again, this is like a rebuke from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying it's not about the competition for more. Kalla. No, it's not about this competition. He says you're going to know, meaning you're going to know the consequences of your boasting when death befalls you. You're boasting and bragging about the attainment of worldly things. ثُمَّ كَلَّا سَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. He says, then know, you are going to know. Repeating this, and this repeated warning is done, as we have seen in previous chapters, as a form of emphasis from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, emphasizing this point. It says, كَلَّا لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عِلْمَ الْيَقِينِ. Know, again, if you only knew with knowledge of certainty. So here, if you only knew with knowledge of the matter, we're talking about a particular thing of certainty. And so here, the response to if, كَلَّا لَوْ, if you only knew, has been omitted. If, and there's an implied meaning. And what that meaning is, كَلَّا لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ, if you knew what will happen on the Day of Judgment with absolute certainty. Okay, we're talking about having yaqeen. It says, if you were to know what would happen يوم القيامة with absolute certainty, you would be too preoccupied to boast and compete for more of this world. You would be too preoccupied. لو تعلمون ماذا يفعل بكم يوم القيامة علم اليقين لا شك فيه. And if you were to know what's going to happen to you on the day of resurrection, with certainty, no doubt therein, then you would be busy, too busy, to be boasting and bragging about an increase in wealth. He says, لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ. You will surely see the hellfire. And this is an oath which is implied here, meaning by Allah. This is something that's implied, it's implicit in the verse, لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ, meaning, وَاللَّهِ لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ. I swear by Allah, you will surely see the hellfire. Ibn Amr and Al-Kisai, they recited this, making it passive. So there's a multitude of different, or there's some different recitations here. La turawunna, as opposed to la tarawunna, la turawunna, making it passive. This is mabni lil majhul, that you will be shown, as opposed to you will see. You will be shown the hellfire. And this was one alternative recitation. The majority of the reciters, they said, La tarawunna al-jahim, as we're mostly accustomed to hearing in the prayer. It's a common recitation, meaning you will see it with your own eyes from a distance, as opposed to you will be shown. The next verse, it reads, ثُمَّ لَتَرَوُنَّهَا عَيْنَ الْيَقِينِ, then you will surely see it with the eye of certainty. And so here, this vision or this seeing is repeated, right? Because the verse before that says, لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ ثُمَّ لَتَرَوُنَّهَا. It's repeated. The same verb here of seeing is repeated. Again, this is for emphasis. Right? To emphasize the significance of that saying, then you will surely see it with the eye of certainty. And this is a vision that is the very essence of certainty by direct observation, meaning it will be a literal sighting. You will see it, because that's when we have certainty. When we're able to see a thing. Someone would say, like, would tell you, so-and-so just arrived back home. And you might say, because you're in doubt, like, and they haven't been around for 10 years, you go, I've got to see him for myself. I've got to see this for myself. Can you believe such and such just happened? I have to see this for myself, meaning I need to put my eyes on it, because that's how we achieve a level of certainty. And so here, that's essentially what's happening. ثُمَّ لَتَرَوُنَّهَا عَيْنَ الْيَقِينِ. that you may be in doubt about Yawm al-Qiyamah. If you remember, the polytheists, the idolaters of Mecca, one of their hang-ups about faith was their belief in the hereafter. They didn't believe in the hereafter. And so a lot of the Meccan surahs, which we opened up with that, this was revealed in Mecca, was to drive home the point that there is a hereafter, utilizing various logical arguments in order to formulate proof to show these idolaters that there's a hereafter. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is further emphasizing this, that you'll see it. You can be in doubt about it, but you're going to see it in a way that there will be absolute certainty. All right? And this refers to the time when the sirat, the sirat, which we could translate as like the bridge, is placed over the hellfire between its two sides. This is when this sighting, according to Mujiruddin al-Ulaymi rahimahullah ta'ala, this sighting will occur then. The next verse says, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. Then you will surely be asked that day about pleasure. So here, meaning addressing the people, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ. Okay? ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ, we're talking about all of mankind. Basically, أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ. You will be asked, O people, يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. The na'im fi dunya. You'll be asked about the blessings that you enjoyed in this world. It's been narrated that these blessings are 5. A full belly, a cool drink, the pleasure of sleep, the shade of a house or a home, and basic well-being or physical stature. اعتدال الخلق. To have a good physiology of sorts. It's also reported that the Prophet ﷺ and his some of companions once were eating dates and drinking water, and he said to them, this is among the blessings that you will be questioned about. These basic eating dates and drinking water, these basic provisions that we have, that we enjoy together, will be asked about these things. Okay, so that gives us kind of a general idea as to the meaning of this chapter. Wallahu a'lam. The next verse, or the next chapter, Surat Al-Asr, very special and powerful chapter in the Quran, is revealed in Mecca, consisting of 3 verses only. Keep that in mind, 3 verses, 71 letters, consisting of only 14 words, very concise in nature. It's been mentioned that Amr ibn al-As went to visit Musaylama al-Kadhab after the Prophet ﷺ was assigned prophethood or commissioned to be a messenger by Allah. And this was before Amr had accepted Islam. So he was still among the idolaters of Quraysh. And when he arrived to Musaylama, he told him what had been revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that it was a short and concise surah. And so Musaylama asked about it, and Amr, he replied, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Reading for him the chapter of Al-Asr. And so we'll discuss the translation of that. However, Musaylama there, hearing this, he tried to compose something similar in order to compete, I guess if you will, about al-wabr. Wal-asr. To match that, he used al-wabr, which is it's like a little mouse with huge ears. Yeah, wabr. So nonsensical. All right, I'm sorry. Sorry. All right, so, yeah, well, but says, then he starts going on. And it basically says, you are only 2 ears and a chest, and the rest of you is digging and burrowing. So he said to Amr, what do you think? Oh, Amr. He said to him, I swear by Allah, you know and I know that you're lying. You're lying. He said, this was revealed to me. Musaylim al-Kadhab, he claimed to be a prophet. Yeah. So he said, this was, here's the revelation of Muhammad. Well, guess what? I have revelation too. And it's about the wabr, which is, like I said, it's like a small little animal that resembles a cat. And the largest part of it is its ears and its torso. And the rest of it's considered to be ugly. It's off-putting. So Musaylama, when he said this, intended by the composition here, and these are rather nonsensical verses, to produce something that would oppose the Quran. But it was not convincing enough even for an idol worshiper of that time. That's why it was important to mention the timeline of Amr ibn As, where he was in terms of his faith. So even he wasn't a follower of the Prophet ﷺ, so it wouldn't have been like somebody who's biased. I have a bias towards Islam and the Quran because I'm a believer in it. But this is someone that's outside looking at both, going, okay, the Arab of the time, even the idolaters, clearly recognized the unique and miraculous nature of the Quran. To the point that in some instances, they would be, even as a rejecter and denier, hearing it would be so moved that they would act upon it, prostrating in some instances, that they couldn't refrain because they were overwhelmed by Allah's words. And so Musaylama, his directive was to be a prophet in opposition or a competing. He's going to open up a business on his own. He's going to start his own religion. And obviously he fell flat here with Yawabar. Didn't land like he hoped it would. Okay? So that's one kind of reference to Al-Asr during its early time there of revelation. It's also some virtue regarding its recitation. At-Tabarani recorded from Abdullah ibn Husn Abi Medina that he said, whenever two men from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ would meet, they would not part until one of them had recited Surat Al-Asr in its entirety to the other person. And one of them had given the greetings of peace to the other. So that was one of the things that they used to do customarily. The nature of, remember what I said, this is a very short and concise chapter, 3 verses only. Imam Shafi'i has been quoted numerous things regarding this chapter. He said, if the people were to ponder on this surah, they would find it sufficient. Another quote from his is, if Allah had not revealed another chapter besides Al-Asr, it would be sufficient from people. So that should give you an idea, as we get ready to explain some of the meanings here, as to the powerful nature of this chapter. So we begin, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Wal-Asr, which is by the time. And this is referring to a measure of time. It's also like a long duration of time, like an age, if you will. It's also been said that it refers to the time after noon until sunset. From noon until sunset. So there are various different views as to the explanation of Al-Asr, if it's like time in general, or a specific time, or a time relating to a particular period, or just a short window of time. Imam Mujiruddin, of course, he goes with what I believe is to be the majority, and that is Ad-Dahr. Wal-Asr means huwa Ad-Dahr, just talking about time in general. Inna al-insana lafi khusr, indeed mankind is in loss. And so here is, this is what's known as Jawab al-Qasam. We've been looking at this over and over again, because many of these chapters in Juz Amma, they start with that وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا. They start with this وَالْفَجْر, the wow al-qasam, which is an oath, like when you say wallahi. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say wallahi, typically. He says, he swears by his creation. Wal-Asr is one of these examples. Drawing our attention to its significance, number one, but making an underlying oath, number two. So there's an oath, and then there's what the oath is made for. Why is Allah swearing? He's swearing because innal insana lafi khusr. Basically saying, I swear by time, mankind is in loss. Indeed, humankind, al-insan, and this refers to all of humanity, though there are some that have pointed out specific individuals. You'll find in some scholars, some of the works of tafsir, some of the scholars have pointed to individuals, meaning that innal insana, meaning this is somebody particular, or it's a handful of people in particular, lafi khusr, are indeed losers, meaning they're in a state of deficiency and in a very poor condition. You can also understand that when a person lives a long life in this world and grows old, they inevitably face decline, weakness, and regression. That's the typical state, right? That mankind is in loss. So there will be a state in which they are in decline or in loss. This, however, applies to this world. As we age and there's a regression of sorts, a loss of physical strength, of capacity, of mental faculty and acuteness, those types of things begin to dwindle typically. That's how you could look at it in this life. But for the believer, this is not the same. The application doesn't apply across the board because the rewards for the believer's iman and their actions continue to be written for them as if they were still performing good deeds in their youth. Okay, because you need to think about this. Okay, this is important. For those of us, and that's just about everybody here, that still has a level of capacity by which we can worship Allah through whatever means that is. Okay, it's not just limited to prayer and fasting. Worshiping Allah is through many different avenues. So long as we have the capacity to do that in our youth, if we do that in our youth while we are young, when we get to a certain point in our life when we can no longer physically do that, it acts as an excuse for us by which we will continue at a diminished capacity and capability. We can't do what we used to do, but because of that excuse and the history that we have of good deeds, we will be rewarded as if we continued to do it at that level, much like a person who is traveling. There's an excuse, or a person that's fallen ill. There's an excuse for you. And out of Allah's grace and His mercy, if you will, for the people of faith, we'll utilize that excuse as a way to continue recording good deeds for you as if you were healthy or as if you were still at home without, because typically when you travel, there are things that you stop doing. There are nawafil, there are these extra prayers that you no longer perform because you're underway. You're moving. You're driving around. You're journeying. Then your prayers, typically you're shortening and combining prayers, right? It's a big difference between praying on time in the full prescribed method and praying shortened and combined, right? More prayer versus less prayer. So while you're traveling, because you used to pray like that, you're getting rewarded while you're praying shortened and combined like that. And so the same thing can happen for you when you reach an age in which your physical ability, perhaps even your mental faculty, begins to regress and decline. That because you used to do it like that, you'll still be recorded to be doing that in your old age. And so this is, here if we say, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, we'd say, mankind is in a state of loss except for those who are of Iman. And the stipulation of as long as they took advantage of that time when they were capable of doing that. And this mirrors the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. We talked about this in Surah Al-Tin. We have certainly created man in the best of stature, then we return him to the lowest of low, meaning the decline there. Imam Mujiruddin says the intended meaning of Innal insana lafi khusr is the disbeliever. So that kind of furthers the explanation, the additional explanation that I just offered in terms of who is it directed to? Mankind, with the exception of the believer. So here we're talking about the disbeliever who acts without obeying Allah. And we can understand there's an exclusion to that, Innal insana lafi khusr, that man is in a state of loss, because the very next verse says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, except for those who have believed and done righteous deeds and advised each other to the truth and advised each other to patience. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says, except for those who have believed, we're talking about the people of Iman, of course, and they have done righteous deeds. They have, of course, advised each other, advising one another to the truth. And the truth here, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, what that means is they've advised each other بِالْإِقَامَةِ عَلَى التَّوْحِيدِ وَالْإِيمَانِ, right? To adhere to Tawheed, the essence of our faith, to worship Allah alone without partner, and Al-Iman, and all that it is comprised of, to have Iman. And a big part of that is Al-Imanu bil-Yawm al-Akhir, in the last day, which is the common theme that we've been looking at. And they advised each other to patience, meaning here, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ عَلَى الطَّاعَةِ, patience when it comes to obedience, وَعَنِ الْمَعْصِيَةِ, and being patient in refraining from sin. It goes both ways. You have to observe patience in both ways. You patiently are obedient to Allah, okay? So that means when patience, okay, let's think about this because this is important. Let's think about this for a minute. There's the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "As-sabru inda sadamat al-ula." Okay? That patience is, what will we say? On impact. Okay? Initial impact is when that's when patience is. Okay? The initial impact of something, like some type of catalyst of some sort, some type of a calamity could be, sure, a hardship or something happens. Patience is observed at initial impact. Patience isn't a day later, maybe 5 minutes, maybe a minute later. That's not patience. Because in that initial moment, that's when you could just go, bah! Right? You could just have a meltdown. Like, just come apart. Just everything comes loose. You know? We all know. I'm not asking. We know. We've done that. We've had the meltdowns. Something happens, and then we don't observe patience, and then it just comes all undone. And you know, typically, if we're good inside, it's something we have to apologize for later. Something that we regret doing. You know, I'm sorry I exploded like that. I'm sorry I came apart like that. I can't believe I just said that, or I just did that. I mean, if there's some goodness, otherwise pride gets in the way and you just let it ride. Like, I'm not apologizing for that meltdown. I'm not apologizing for that beating that I just gave out for no real reason. Yeah, I'm not apologizing for me overreacting, because I'm not wrong. In the sadamat al-ula, right? So when you think about that in terms of your obedience to Allah, how do you think that applies? To be patient with the obedience of Allah. We're not talking about reacting to a stimulus. There's a stimulus here, which typically would be like a calamity or something happens, and then your patience would be Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That would be your patience. Right away, a calamity happens, boom, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To the degree that the Prophet ﷺ was reported that when the lamp would, the candle would go out, leaving them in darkness, he would say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. Right? That's the level of patience, even for the slightest of things. There's no irritation, there's no annoyance, there's no blowing up, there's no whatever, it's just patience. So what happens when it comes to the obedience of Allah? How can we be patient with that? What does that mean? What do you think? I'm asking you now. Okay? To continue. Good? What else? Okay, not complaining about. Okay, praising Allah. Think about this. Continuing. You got something? Being grateful, of course, that's a type of worship. Praising Allah is a type of worship. Okay, those things you would need to observe patiently. What about when you learn of an obligation? When you realize, oh, I have to do that? But I don't like that. I don't like that. You mean, here's an example, something that's happening in my life. It's time to wear hijab as a woman. I don't like that. It's not what I'm enjoying or something. I don't know. I'm not going to speak to the feelings of wearing hijab because I don't do that. But that's a type of patience when you learn of something that you should be doing to be obedient to Allah. To be patient is right then and there. Okay, let's get at it. Let's go for it. And to be consistent with these things. To be consistent. Not these peaks and valleys that people complain of. My iman is so low. I don't know why. I need an iman boost. That's because we're in a valley of a lack. The valley in that valley or that dip in your iman is a lack of obedience. That's the result of no obedience. So your iman goes down, right? We know that iman is impacted. Yazid wa yanqus. It goes up and it goes down. So we have to observe patience when it comes to that. And then an al-ma'siyah, and then you have to be patient in regards to refraining from sin. And of course that is when you're called to it. When you lust after it, when you desire that sin, you have to be patient. You have to refrain. You have to fight and you have to struggle. It's like anything, any vice. If you want to be successful in overcoming the vice, you have to persevere through the pains of it and not give in. At least that has to be the goal, to not give in. Okay? And in the event that you do give in, then you have to return quickly. You have to make a quick U-turn. You can't go too far off. You have to make a quick U-turn via Tawbah. Right? I've made a slip. I gave in. I wasn't patient. I've veered off. The further you veer off, the harder it is, and the longer it is, the longer it will take you to come back. Right? Short, come back right away. To be patient with all of that. And in that event, he says, they're not in loss. Except for those who have believed and done righteous deeds and advise each other to truth and advise each other to patience. In that case, they are not in a state of loss. Ibn Abbas, it was reported, radiyallahu anhuma, that he gave a khutbah one time on the mimbar. He says, indeed, mankind is in loss. He says, this refers to Abu Jahl. Except for those who have believed. Illa ladhina amanu. He says, Abu Bakr. As-Siddiq. Iman. وعملوا الصالحات. He says, Umar. وتواصوا بالحق. Uthman. That means advise each other to the truth. وتواصوا بالصبر. Ali. Radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. And this was actually traced back to the Prophet ﷺ in some narrations. However, what appears to be the case is that is mawquf ala Ibn Abbas. But it sounds like one of those things that he wouldn't just say without having heard it from the Prophet ﷺ. Wallahu a'lam. And that concludes Wal-Asr. And that's where we're going to stop for tonight. Muadhin is here. And he's going to get going for us, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.